Hello and welcome back to GraphQL Fireside Chats. My name is Sarah Renaud with This.Labs. This event is part of a 4-part online series hosted with Hasura. Each week we will focus on GraphQL and a different front-end framework. This week is all about GraphQL and Flutter. Our sponsors today are This.Labs and Hasura. This.Labs are your partners in modern digital transformation. We specialize in mentorship, consulting, training, and staff augmentation for enterprise organizations. Find out more at this.labs.com or send us an email at hi@this.co. Hasura is an open source engine that connects to your databases and microservices and auto-generates a production-ready GraphQL backend. You can read more about Hasura at hasura.io. GraphQL Fireside Chats continue next week. Join us for GraphQL and Vue on August 4th, GraphQL and Angular on August 11th, and GraphQL and Relay on August 18th. For more information, check out graphql-meetup.com. I'm pleased to introduce our speakers for today's Fireside Chat. Tanmay Gopal, founder of Hasura, Chris Sells, Senior Product Manager at Flutter and Developer Experience at Google, and Ashwan Goyal, New Initiatives at Swiggy. Welcome, everyone. I will let Tanmay take it from here.
Hey, everybody, and thank you so much, Chris and Ashwan, for joining us. To kick things off, would love for a round of quick introductions, and let us know where you're dialing in from, Chris.
Hi, my name is Chris, and I am a PM on the Flutter team. I'm officially based in California, but have been living in Portland, Oregon with my family during the pandemic. And I have a long history of developer tools and services of all kinds. Developers are my people, and I've been on the Flutter team for about a year and a half and have loved it. Love Flutter, love the Flutter team, love the Flutter community.
That sounds awesome. And what kind of stuff have you been doing kind of before you started working with?
Well, so I've been at Google for about almost 6 years now. The first 3 years were cloud developer tools. After that, I did a year on Android, and then before Google, I had about 20 plus years in developer tools and services in the Windows and Microsoft ecosystem.
Got it. That's awesome. Yeah, and when I was trying to find out where Chris is, I went to your Twitter profile, and that's the first time I saw lat long. And then I took that lat long and pasted that into search, and that also worked. So that was interesting. That's the first time I've done that. But that's awesome. Ashwin?
Yeah, so I work at Swiggy. Swiggy is India's largest food delivery company. I joined the New Initiatives team last year. Basically, New Initiatives is where we work on high conviction, high impact projects that we think are going to shape the future of our company. Now, I personally joined as more of like a project manager / product manager, but due to the needs of what this fast-paced environment that New Initiatives is, I kind of got into coding. That's where I kind of got exposed to Flutter, Hasura, etc. And yeah, it's been a wild ride, I would say.
That's amazing. That's awesome. And what kind of stuff were you doing before you started leading some new initiatives at Swiggy?
So I've been a serial founder. I haven't found any success. That's with startups, that's always the case, right? But I've been, ever since I came out of college, I think I knew that I wanted to own a product, right? I wanted to see it through from start to end, take complete ownership. And I've worked at a company called Bombay Shirts, which did custom shirts. I've worked at a media company. I've started my own media company. I've started a YouTube channel. A bit of everything, I guess, in there. Now it's food, so
that's awesome. That's awesome. That's amazing. I'll do a quick introduction as well. I'm the founder at Hasura. helped build one of the early versions of Hasura, and then of course it was an early version, but entirely scrapped, doesn't exist anymore. I don't have a line of code that I've contributed anymore, but that's how it is. Hasura is in the kind of GraphQL ecosystem to kind of help people get productive with GraphQL on top of their data sources. This is an extremely exciting conversation to have. Because it's an amazing set of people that we have here, where Ashwan's been kind of leading the team and working actively in building a new application and kind of scaling that, kind of going from MVP to validation to scaling to rapid iteration on a consumer application using technologies. And people who work with the creators of those technologies, like Chris and myself, are working on like Flutter and then Hasura and GraphQL. It's going to be an amazing, I think, discussion. We'll chat a lot about just kind of understanding Flutter and GraphQL and Hasura and stuff like that over the course of this conversation. So Ashwan, I mean, kind of maybe to kick things off, Ashwan, if you could describe kind of what this what the application that you're kind of that you've been building is, and then also kind of what that stack is, and how you folks thought about choosing that stack when you were getting into it. What were the kind of options you were evaluating and thinking about, and that'd be a great way to kickstart this conversation.
Sure. So first, regarding the application itself, right? While we've not talked too much about it in public, that's how we tend to treat our new initiatives, where we want to give it a fair chance, right? Saying that we don't want to bias the audience by saying it's a part of a large company's product, because then may negatively or positively impact. But what it is that we're trying to digitize commerce in this country more so than it is already. And we feel like COVID is accelerating this trend, where a business that was traditionally completely offline cannot remain completely offline, right? That at least a part of it, or maybe entirely, has to come online, right? And the tools that exist today, we feel, don't do justice to a person who's coming online for the first time. So we want to build tools that make it a lot easier. Now, to this end, because the vision is so massive, right? We expect there to be multiple actors in this this app. There's going to be a business, there's going to be the consumer, there may be us, there may be other integrations, etc. Right? We expect this app to be super difficult to build. So obviously, the idea is that we break it down into parts. The first part was obviously validating whether something like this makes sense to build at all, right? And to that end, we chose Flutter because honestly, the first 3 developers we onboarded said we like Flutter. Right? Simple as that. We were optimizing for developer happiness. They said we want to use Flutter, and I'm like, if that's what you're comfortable with, then awesome. And Hasura, honest to God, was just a placeholder. We said that, hey, we'll code the server later, right? So until we code the server, we need something, right, to store data, and we're going to use Hasura as that placeholder. And I think 1 month into it, when we were about like our deadline was 30 days away, someone's like, why do you want to recode everything we've already done, right? And at that point, we're like, okay, maybe for the first version, we'll use Hasura, right? And we'll come back, because no one was convinced that something like this could be a production-ready product, right? Correct. Of course, we've changed our minds since then, but yeah, back then it was just like going with the flow. I guess that would be a good start.
Right. No, that's awesome. And so when what was that kind of early those early experiences like? There was like you had what 2 to 3 months to get like a first version of your application out.
Yeah. So not just that, we had to design it, we had to build it, we had to launch it, and most of us were not even app developers. We didn't even know how to release an app on the Play Store or the App Store. We were Googling it like a week before launch, right? And in this space, figuring stuff out with other languages was really difficult. I don't know, trying to set up a new repo in a new language. Like, let's say I'm trying to go React Native and I want to set up a new repo and say hello world on the screen, right? If every developer is spending 2 days doing that, then I think that's just 2 days that's lost. Whereas with Flutter and Hasura, we just kind of got started in 1 hour, and every new developer that was joining was able to quickly get started. That's what kind of convinced us that, hey, we are maybe on the right track.
Got it. And so I think kind of like diving deeper into Flutter a little bit, right? Like from Chris, would kind of love to hear from you, like how what the genesis and kind of the goals for Flutter itself are, and how does it kind of at a high level compare to Are there similar kind of frameworks and initiatives that developers can use, and how does it compare to that? And I'm a little bit familiar with React Native personally, not too much with Flutter, but would also love for you to chat a little bit about Dart and the choice of Dart for using Flutter, and kind of how that's evolved over the last few years.
Sure. So Flutter came from an experiment. You probably have heard about 20% time inside of Google, but the idea here is that Google engineers are encouraged to experiment with things, with ideas. They have some crazy idea, and so in this particular case, the crazy idea was some engineers working on the Chrome team who looked at the rendering engine and saw 20 years worth of legacy and if statements and special case code, and they thought, hey, what happens if we just strip all this out? What can we do with the rendering if we just focus on the modern best practices, right? And they found 1 or 2 orders of magnitude of rendering performance increase, which doesn't surprise anyone. But then they'd come up with an engine that couldn't actually render the web, right? Because of course we still have that 20 years.
Yep.
So they said, well, what can we do with such a thing? And having a rendering engine that can run anywhere is pretty powerful. If you look at the platform that Google supports, iOS, Android, desktop in various forms, web, right? And of course we have our own smart displays and our own devices, right? How powerful would it be for Google to be able to have this rendering engine where instead of having, I think somebody did, the number of clocks we've built. We have 7 clock implementation teams that are all building the material guidance and trying to build the same clock, work the same way. But there's 7 teams building a clock. And,
Got it. So just to interrupt a little bit, Chris, like I think this when you say rendering engine, right? What does that mean exactly? Like what is the rendering engine that people were using before and that people wanted to move to? They were using the 7 teams building a clock were just writing native code on Android and iOS, web, and all these platforms. And so the idea was, what if we had a platform that allowed them to write that once? And then the rendering engine could run on all those platforms, and you could have one team building a clock that looked and felt the same across everything, and therefore save Google money and put those engineers to work on solving other problems. And, Google's a big company, but we still only have so many engineers to go around, and we're still always looking for more engineers to solve more bigger problems. So if we could be more efficient about the use of our engineers and make them more productive and put them to work on other things, then that's a big win. And so the proof of concept engine we built was essentially the core runtime of Flutter. It's an engine. If you want to think about the core of Flutter, it's kind of think of it as Unity, right? Unity is an engine, and native code accesses that engine and does all kinds of great, amazing things for games. You can think of Flutter as Unity for apps. Really, it's just the same thing. And so the team went looking for a platform or a language, and it's really a platform that they found with Dart that allowed them to do 2 pretty unique things when you join them together. They wanted a really simple, fast, easy language for writing code and for executing code very quickly. So Dart supported JIT compilation, and there's a VF that you use at debugging time, and that enables sub 1 second hot reload. You make a change, and boom, you immediately see that change as you write the code, and you run it on your Android device or iOS or on the web or wherever you're running your code. Right? We support hot reload, and I don't know. Well, we do know, right, that this changes how people write their code. Essentially, what they do is they open up their development environments, they run their app in its current state, they navigate to the screen that they're going to work on, they start writing code, and they watch their app change in front of them with the
with the data that they've got in their current app.
Yeah.
And that is
It is surprising. It is surprising how powerful that feeling is, right? It's just surprising how impactful that feature is, right? And I look back to the even if when I think about like the rise of dynamic languages, almost, right? It's kind of that same experience of saying I can write some code in an interpreter, right, and then and get that immediate feedback versus waiting for a compile to happen, right? It's almost like that factor is that central. But that's super amazing to hear. And do you think that this effort of kind of creating this was similar to and I remember like this was just about, I think, 10 years ago, which feels like it was a millennium ago though, which was there was this thing called GWT, right, which was this Google web developer kit that was kind of like a Java based thing that would create kind of like this I don't know if it would be a rendering engine, but like a common way to build across different platforms. Do you think there were similarities with that and the motives were similar? How do you think about that?
Yeah, it's interesting. GWT had similar goals, which is to provide a statically typed language that provide high developer productivity, but then to target the native platform, right? They generated JavaScript to target the native platform that they were targeting, which was the web. And Dart is similar, right? I mean, you use just-in-time compilation and a VM during development time, but when you actually are ready to release your app, again, whether it's to the web or iOS or Android or desktop, wherever you're sending your Flutter app, you get native code to that platform. So what you get is, the best of both, right? You get this super fast development environment that you would normally only get in, dynamically compiled languages, right? Or interpreted languages. But then you get runtime performance and app size that you would normally get with something that was targeting native, right? And that's the unique thing that Dart brought to Flutter, that there wasn't anything else that did that, and that's the choice of Dart for Flutter. And then it has done an amazing thing. We've got developers ground up. Hey, we love Flutter. Let's use Flutter. Let's build a new project in Flutter, and we're seeing it kind of grassroots take hold in all kinds of places. With a huge number of developers, the growth on Flutter is amazing to me. At the same time, you have native performance, right? So you don't have to give up one or the other. You don't have to give up a developer experience to get native performance. You don't have to give up a native performance to get a developer experience. You get both, and that, of course, is kind of the key value proposition for Flutter.
Yep. I mean, having your cake and eating it too, right? Best.
That's right.
I think. So that makes a lot of sense. And so, I mean, I think like for like Ashwan said, right? Swiggy is one of the largest food delivery service in India, which is kind of insane. India is the largest number of people in the world also. So
that's pretty big. That's a big number.
It's a huge number, right? And kind of in once organizations reach that kind of scale, right? It is amazing to be able to kind of rapidly kind of adopt new technologies, experiment with them, release stuff, validate things, scale things, right? And it is amazing that in kind of that, like, in a fairly high pressure, a high velocity environment, right? Where the stakes kind of progressively become higher, that Ashwin, you will kind of be able to adopt Flutter and Dart, which are relatively kind of newer in the ecosystem, right? So how has that experience been for you, leading the team and for your developers when it came to using Flutter and Dart specifically, right? Like, what were your kind of expectations going in, right? How was that learning experience? What resources did you use? And what were kind of some of the challenges that you faced? And how what was that like in the first few months of building the application?
Sure. I'll first touch upon the fact that it's a high pressure environment, right? And that this company is obviously moving fast. We in 2015, it was like everyone was starting a food delivery company, right? It was the hot thing. Just like GPT is trending today, there was food delivery was trending back then. And there were only two companies, I guess, for the most part, survived that onslaught, right? Ours being one of them. And if you speak to the founders about what they used to do regarding technology back then, you'll almost get a blank stare. Like, we used to use WooCommerce, right? We were running a food delivery company on WooCommerce, and one of our biggest USPs is being able to track the delivery person, in live location, right?
Right.
I think we were one of the first companies to make it happen. Back then, before we had this Google Maps integration and all, our founder used to call the partner and say, "Hey, where are you on the map? Tell me what's near you, so I'm gonna communicate that to the customer." Right? That's how we've generally grown, right?
Wow.
Doing things that don't scale. So that while our companies become bigger, that attitude is still there in our founders, right? So when we go pitch technologies to them, it's not like it's not a tough ask, right? It's basically saying that this is the right tool for the right job, and this is what we have to do. Now, regarding the experience, I started off a bit distanced from the technology decisions, but as I said, right, our developers came in. They were interested in Flutter. They said this new Hasura thing is out, makes it easier to handle your database. I'm like, okay, go ahead and use it. But I think as the app started seeing some success, I got involved, right? Because every time a production bug comes in, I'm waking up the developers at 11 in the night. I'm like, I'd rather just fix it myself in case they don't pick up, right? Because again, high stress environment. It hurts me physically when a customer says, "I'm not able to access your app."
That is true. Well, I'm going to add here, Ashwan, that this is you're continuing the founder experience. So this is great.
Exactly.
Like, wake up at 12, I'm going to fix this myself for my users, right? So that's awesome.
Yeah. And what happened after that is that I started to get into it. I started to get into Flutter and Hasura both. And it was too easy. That's why I in the note I sent before this talk, right, I said it felt like a toy. Like, how is it so easy? Like, I come from, I was taught Java in school, right? When I was in college, I was taught Java, and everything was 500 lines. Like, you want to show hello world on screen, make 6 classes, and find a way to get it on the screen. And now I'm like, I just wrote 5 lines of code, and there's UI on the screen, and it's connected to our database, and it's I can create data back and forth.
Right.
So I think the experience is, at least for me, coming from a traditional web developer background, seeing mobile development become so easy was actually very encouraging, because then I'm like, hey, if I can do it, then others can as well, right? And even though one of the key things that non-tech people bring up, leaders in our organization bring up, is that, hey, if you're going to use new technology, you're going to find it difficult to hire people, right? Because technology has not existed for long enough for there to be experienced people, right? But that is made up for the fact by somebody like me being able to go from nothing to an experienced mobile developer in like 2 months. That convinces everyone that, hey, even if there's not experience yet, we can get people on board that are generally good at programming, and teach them this amazing stack and get them.
Right. That makes sense. And what was that? What was kind of the the Dart learning experience for you like? Right. What was what worked for you? Did you just kind of dive into code? Did you go through did you go through tutorials, or did it flow? How would you compare it to like the learning experience of getting started with something like a JavaScript based thing or something else?
I think with JavaScript, there's a lot of gotchas, right? Like, you start coding and something doesn't work, and generally what you assume is that it's your fault, right? As the developer, because you're new, right? Something must be amiss with what you're writing. Whereas it could be that in the case of JavaScript, it's the language itself, and you don't want to give up, right? As a new developer, resilience is how you're going to learn something. But 10 hours later, you might just find out that it's not me, it's the language or the framework, right? And that's a very bad experience. And then you don't know whom to trust. Should I trust myself to be resilient, or should I trust Stack Overflow?
Because like array plus object is equal to null. Anything can happen in JavaScript.
Yeah, and that's not the same with that. One is, of course, I felt comfortable because it felt like I was reminded of Java, as in the syntactical, the strong typing and all. I was reminded of Java, so it felt comfortable. And second is, I dived right in. And what I quickly realized is that I can trust the language. So when I say something, when I write something, and if something breaks, I know that there's something that I need to go fix versus something that Dart needs to go fix. And I think once you start, using it, I jumped in directly into production code, right? There was a running app already.
Right.
I'm like, hey,
Right.
this pixel is off. I want to go fix it. I found the
Right.
screen. I made the change, and it just worked. And I was like, this is awesome. I'm a mobile developer now.
That's awesome. And so, one of the things that's very important especially as we look at the last few years of mobile and web development, right? What has been critical is the ability to kind of be able to kind of build on top of what the community is doing, right? Like to be able to reuse UI widgets or to be able to use libraries, right? That other people have written. And that one of the big reasons behind why, JavaScript as a language is inconsistent, to be polite. It's the most polite way of putting it, right? In its user experience, because it wasn't designed first up to be a complete language, right? But the reason why JavaScript, TypeScript, and things, why JavaScript are becoming so popular is because of that ability to incrementally kind of move to something better while still being able to interop with a larger ecosystem and a base, right, and stand on kind of the shoulder community, right? And that experience is critical, and that ability that interoperability is critical to kind of grow a community and for a technology to be useful. And so Chris, when you've thought about like Flutter and the choice of Dart, has that impacted your thinking at all? And then how do you think about what if I want to reuse a native library, or there's a new native functionality that comes out that is very specific to iOS or Android, right? When you think about that interop experience with Flutter, either for Flutter and native, which is one part, but also for maybe Dart and another language that I want to use alongside, right? What is that story like? What has that been like? And what is that moving towards in the future?
Well, we think deeply about the ecosystem on the Flutter team, and that's work that takes up a lot of my time. Actually, I work very closely with the ecosystem at various levels to make sure that not only is Flutter itself a great developer experience, but the whole ecosystem around Flutter, this set of shared packages and plugins that people can reach for. And that's a different kind of problem, because it isn't the case that the Flutter team is big enough to be able to build the long tail of all the things that we want to integrate with. So the job of the Flutter team really there was to build the infrastructure that enables plugins that work across multiple platforms. And we've done a lot of work recently to push on the ecosystem, to encourage the ecosystem. For example, initially when we were building plugins, we had this idea that we shipped first on Android and iOS. So if you're building a plugin, by definition, you're supporting Android and iOS. But there was nothing in the metadata format that said, oh, this is supporting Android or iOS. And in fact, we ourselves built some plugins that said, oh, this is actually Android only. It's just to get to Android specific functionality. And if you call it on iOS, it just doesn't work. There's no marking. And so recently, we updated our metadata format so you could say explicitly it does Android, it does iOS, it does web, it does whatever it does, right? And then it doesn't do all of the rest. Then combine that with this idea of federation. And the idea of federation is it's rare to find a developer or a team of developers who can write all of the native code that integrates, with Dart and Flutter with all of the platforms that you want a plugin to be able to support. So the idea of federation is, hey, you've got some mobile devs, they can build, that part of the camera, the native access to the camera. You've got some web devs, they can build the camera integration. You've got some Windows, you've got some Linux. And so a federation really enables, different teams to kind of build different supports for this set of plugins where you're also providing a unified developer experience for the Flutter developer that says, I want the camera. And, when I deployed Android, I want the Android bits to be included. And when I deployed web, I want the web bits to be included, right? And that's all compiled time decision. But I can just say, I want the camera. I want to call these functions on the camera. I want camera good things to happen. And then at the lower level, the combination of the metadata and the federation allows you to pull in the right bits. So we've worked on that. Then at the same time, we've also been pushing on this idea of higher and higher quality for the ecosystem as a whole. For example, we just released a new pub.dev with this idea with a revamped scoring system. And the scoring is kind of all the things that we can know about a package or a plugin that indicate quality. And we publish all of that, and we make it very clear to both to the user what the quality is and to the authors so that they can work and increase their quality. Because of course, developers always want to see their stuff at the top of the list, right? They always want to be at the best. So that we make those scores public so that they can kind of continue to push on their quality and increase their quality. And then at the very tippy top, we pick off the general purpose ones that are just high quality across the boards, and we have a program with the Flutter Favorite program. And the idea is that we actually do code reviews, we look at the usability, we read through the documents, documentation, and the samples, and we say, oh, this one is exemplary, or this is this should be at the top of everyone's list. And all of that, right from the the infrastructure of the package manager itself and the command line tools and the metadata format and the federation and the website for discovery and scoring to include quality and the Flutter Favorite program. That's all about pushing the ecosystem to be higher and higher quality. And what we actually see is something that's very unusual in ecosystems, in my experience, that while the Flutter ecosystem continues to grow by leaps and bounds, every time I look, the number is higher. The last time I looked, we had more than 10,000 Flutter compatible packages and plugins, which is huge. I mean, that's an order of magnitude more than a year ago. At the same time, we actually see the average quality of these packages go up. Right? You would expect the average to go down, but the top end to go up. But that's not what's happening. The average is in fact going up, which is amazing.
Yeah, very healthy sign for a growing community, right? So that's great. I think. Right. So I think that makes a tremendous amount of sense, and I think and that's great to hear as well. And I think what do you think are the if you think about kind of this style of this kind of this hybrid development style in general, right? Like if you had to summarize in a few sentences, what the key kind of differences are for people who are new to Flutter who are listening in, right? Like what are the key differences in the philosophy or the approach and maybe the value benefit when compared to things like you trying to use using other kinds of hybrid approaches to development, and especially on the interop side, right? Like suppose I just have to use this native package for which there isn't a Flutter federated package on it, and I have to use this in my team. What does that experience look like, and especially how does it compare to where the ecosystem is today on hybrid frameworks?
Well, so I'll say two things about that. One thing I'll say is Flutter was designed from its APIs to its core principles to be kind of powerful and simple to use in a way that I have never seen an API being. It has this unusual quality that as you dig deeper and you find whole new wonderful things you never saw before, as opposed to a lot of things you dig deeper and you're like, oh, this is where the crappy part is, right? It's not like that. You get to the more amazing it becomes. And again, I'm unbiased, or I'm obviously biased, right? So feel free to take my word for the grain of salt. But I've joined the Flutter team because I love programming Flutter, and that's the truth. So we use composition, we use declarative style of programming, we use reactivity, we use static typing, we use all the best kind of practices of how to build UIs that we've learned over the last 20 years as an industry, and we've put all of that into Flutter. So that's one thing I will say. The other thing I will say is the core philosophy of Flutter. Yes, it is an engine that runs on multiple platforms, and yes, you can write a code base that runs across multiple platforms, but it is not done in a lowest common denominator kind of way. It is not the The only things you can do in Flutter are the things that all platforms support. We don't do that with Flutter at all. Instead, Flutter is made to be the best possible way to build an app on every one of the platforms we support, and that is always our goal. Whether we make it or not, I'll leave that to the community to judge, but that is our goal. And so, as part of the consequence of that, it is always the case in a Flutter app that you can always drop down to native to get to whatever you need to do. If you want, to pull in some Android only code, then that's fine. You can write your Java code and then hook that up to your Dart and Flutter app. If you want to package that and make it available to either other of your projects or to the world at large, you can put it into a plugin and kind of encapsulate it and keep it away from your main app as a kind of a packaging technique. But that's up to you. You can always get to the native API. So that is how we enable the Flutter runs everywhere while still providing high quality experience everywhere, because you can always run Flutter code. It has never been the case that we expect that all apps can just be Dart and Flutter. We know that people need to write native code, whether it's packaged as plugins or just as part of an app. That's okay. That is to be expected.
Got it. No, that makes sense. And I think what's I think amazing to hear, because I haven't because this is not something that I thought about before, but all the kind of entire approach that Flutter is kind of taking is very, very similar to the way that we think about Hasura. When you think about federation, for us, native platforms are data sources, and we think about what we do is the Hasura approach is when you have this kind of GraphQL API. Hasura has a metadata engine that Hasura has a metadata engine that kind of takes an incoming API call, is able to kind of add access control rules to it or annotations to it, and then compiles that down to a SQL dialect that is specific for a database. And then as we think about adding support for multiple databases, one of the things that we're very conscious of is that it's not about the lowest common denominator of what all databases support. It's about providing the best experience to extract the sure, there's kind of common value, but it's also about the experience of being able to extract the most powerful features of that specific platform or data store that you are using, right? Because you are on that database for a reason, right? So that's kind of super interesting to hear, and especially well, I mean, we think about federation as well in a slightly different context, but that's very, very interesting. I think, and kind of maybe switching gears to that kind of API integration and GraphQL side, right? What is the kind of what was kind of the experience like, Ashwan, for you folks and for the team when they were kind of starting to integrate for the first time with a GraphQL API instead of a REST API, and that API integration story for the developers? What was that journey like? What were things that made you happy, and what were kind of gotchas with that API integration piece specifically?
Yeah, so I come from a Rails background, right? We used to write hardcore Rails servers, and they were made for REST APIs. So we would, create a scaffold, and it would automatically create all the actions for, creating an object, getting the index, getting the show, getting one object in return, right? And then moving from that to something like a GraphQL, especially Hasura, I guess, in this context, where the entire API was kind of generated for you. It was a convention, right? Saying that if you want to access data, this is the way you access it. If you want to access 10 objects, this is the way you access it, right? And the data source is abstracted behind that. I think that made it easier to get started, saying that the person who's managing the database doesn't have to be the person communicating with the person writing the apps, right? Because that person could make their foreign keys and their validations on the server, ensure that the server never becomes inconsistent. But the app developer only has to worry about the view, the front end, right? In that sense, I think it was. I'm always a believer in convention over configuration, and I think GraphQL kind of embodies that completely.
Right. No, so when you started working with GraphQL and Flutter specifically, right? What was kind of the GraphQL client side experience like? And is it for example, was have you folks been using kind of you've been calling the GraphQL API like a REST API with the GraphQL query embedded in the body, or is there also like a code gen step that happens to kind of, because the GraphQL API, any particular GraphQL query you can kind of extract the type of the response from that, right? And then use that within the code base as well. So what does that piece look like right now?
So initially, we started with a very, we would say, scalable approach where GraphQL queries were in their own folder. Then we had a repository that would access those queries, convert the response into a native Dart model and send it back to the view. But as we kept building, we realized that so much abstraction is actually hurting us, because the query was situated somewhere else and the function that was calling that query was somewhere else. So we actually found it a lot more comfortable to have the query inline. Saying that, hey, this is where the access comes out. You give it, let's say, an ID, and in return, you get a Dart model that represents that object. So we found it a lot easier to have it more inline than abstracted. But I think as we scale, we'll have to revisit some of this, because now we're seeing that the same object may be accessed in 10 different ways, depending on which part of the application is accessing it, right? The number of variables may change, the where condition may change. So I think it's a process of discovery, but my recommendation is that you start with the easiest approach first, and as you scale, you let your requirements guide you rather than trying to build everything on day one, saying that, hey, I want to make a scalable API.
Right. Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense, and I think that's very interesting as well, because like I think there's so many different ways to approach that kind of how you package the GraphQL API with the with the way that you're building UI, right? Like for example, a lot of like when we think about like the way when GraphQL was invented at Facebook, and their motivation there, and the client that they use is the Relay GraphQL client, and then internal modifications of that, right? It's a very different stack inside Facebook. But as kind of GraphQL came out to the outside, came to the world outside, right? That amount of tooling that is required to be able to say, the vision for GraphQL was to say, we have a UI component. We can declare the API call or the data dependency next to the UI component, right? We can co-locate that. And what happens is that as the UI renders, the runtime, the rendering kind of like the rendering engine that is kind of displaying this markup and running the component code to display the UI, that piece, as it is kind of stepping through the components in the component tree, is going to extract those pieces of the GraphQL query and compose a full GraphQL query and automatically make that query, right? But that requires a tremendous amount of tooling on the client side to make that vision come to life, right? And although Relay is spectacular at making that possible, very few people still use Relay, because Relay is a little bit harder to use, it's a little bit harder to set up. But the vision for the GraphQL API integration of the UI component was to say that we can co-locate our data dependencies, what we want from the API, next to the UI component that we wanted, right? As opposed, and although a more kind of common initial approach is like what you said, right, where you'd rather just keep all of the API stuff in one place, right? Which at least makes it convenient to think about, right? But from a developer point of view, if everything was perfect, it would be ideal to have that data dependency next to the UI component, right? So I think it's going to be very interesting to see how that piece also gradually evolves, because there's going to be a significant amount of tooling required to make that happen. But Chris, on this piece of like data co-location with the UI and the API integration with Flutter, do you have a point of view on that? And what is kind of ideal in your mind, Flutter or not, when it comes to application building on the UI? And I remember you mentioned also that that this was OData and GraphQL are kind of in a similar place. And from your experiences with both OData and GraphQL, does that impact the way you think about UI architecture, UI plus API architecture, and good developer experience there?
Yeah, that's a hard question, right? I mean, because fundamentally, what you're doing is whenever you've got a remote system, you're dealing with the tension between consistency which is, you should go back to the database every single time because it's the only real central store of all the data. But versus, client-side caching, where you actually have, a local cache and you don't have to go to the database for data for some amount of time, whatever that is. Maybe it's a session, maybe it's a second, maybe it's until you get some notification from the server that your cache is invalid. Those are hard problems to solve. They just are. I'm a fan of the repository pattern as a way to provide a layer between all of those kind of client-side caching and that kind of idea of, hey, anywhere in the app can just go to the repository and get what they want. Here's some query or ID or whatever they need, and then there's a layer that implements the app-specific, caching and consistency logic. That is almost the only kind of guidance I can offer at that point, because every application has trade-offs, and those are the trade-offs, right? Do you want to go back over the wire every single time? Do you want to keep a local cache? How do you validate this cache? And cache is hard. It just is.
Yep. No, that makes sense. And from kind of the typed experience, right? The experience of having an API that can help you generate types, right? What do you think the kind of opportunity there in the GraphQL and Flutter ecosystem is for client-side tooling, right? Like, where is it? Do you have a sense of where it is today, and where you would like where you think that it can move, and what kind of some good wins for developer experience are on that side, right? In the sense of if I can have like this API client, I can have this API integration, I can do some kind of code generate some models automatically, help me bootstrap that repository layer that I'm building internally, with efficient kind of type bindings through the system, as in a way that's as automated as possible. Does that make sense? And like, do you have a?
It does. And this is something we think long and hard about on the Flutter team, which is essentially what you're talking about is bridging type systems. I've got some online object representation in JSON or XML or whatever format it comes across, right? And it could be on the disk too. And the question is, how and when do you turn that into Dart types? I'm a static typing fan all the way. Every time I'm passing strings around to offset properties and objects, I know I'm doing something wrong, right? So I'm a fan of automating as much as that tooling as possible. We don't provide support for reflection in Dart on purpose because it makes it super hard for us to optimize your Flutter app and bring it down to the smallest possible side, right? You have to. As soon as you leave reflection in, now you've got a whole other runtime type system that needs to be able to execute dynamic code at runtime, and it's just a whole other thing, right? So we have done that trade-off where we take reflection out on purpose so that we get the smallest, fastest thing that we can get. But what that then does is it pushes the burden onto the developer at development time. Right? Hey, I don't have the type information at runtime, therefore I have to use the type information I have at development time, which often involves, hey, there's that type system over there. I'd like to integrate it into Dart. Let me take the metadata I've got, whatever it is, generate type safe wrappers, and so at runtime, you hope for the best. That is essentially what you're doing, bridging type systems. Every way we can automate that and take the human out of it, the fewer errors you get, and I'm a fan of that.
No, that makes sense. And I think Ashwan, on your side, how is that kind of GraphQL and Flutter tooling been for the team? Are there hopes and expectations that you have in terms of improvements and things that can be done there? What has that experience been like?
So talking about the type conversion, right? As soon as we make a model, the first thing we do is make a Dart class, and then we write like 200 lines of boilerplate code to convert the remote representation into a native representation, and back and forth, right? In fact, at one point, when we first started, the first class that was made, the first model that was made, created 10 different functions for 10 different things you might do, like to convert it into JSON, to convert it back from JSON, to convert it to XML, etc. Right? And every class that was made subsequently, every developer started copying that code. Like they started making 10 representation. I'm like, we don't need 10 representations for everything. That was just a special case. It was a user object, right? But the copy paste game was so strong that everyone started that boilerplate journey. So, and one of the mistakes that the first developer made is that we wanted to convert a numeric type in Postgres to a double in Dart. Right. And they were not able to, they didn't know too much about try parse, etc. So what they did is they converted the number to a string, and then they converted that string to a number again. Right. And that was in the entire code base. Like 100 times, whenever you want to convert a number to a double, you're like string first and then double. Right. So yeah, it's slightly painful when I saw that for the first time. I'm like, what are you guys doing? Right? It's like he did it first, so I've just copied it.
Right.
But I think yes, as we go along, what we're seeing is that the UI models are not too. It's difficult to abstract them out completely from the repository, right? So whereas earlier, what we would do is I would, let's say, send the exact variables that the database needed. Let's say I'm trying to update the user's name. I would send the user ID and the new name, right? And then the repository would take care of updating the name. Whereas now what we do is we send the entire user object inside. So the repository now has to have some context of what that user object can contain, right? Which is a bit more UI focused. So what we're seeing is that over time, there is a bit of a bridge happening where it's not completely separated, where the repository does know something about the UI and the UI does know something about the repository. So in such a case, I think anything that automates that, that 200 lines of boilerplate code would make a material impact on productivity.
Got it. Now that makes a lot of sense. And so kind of as we kind of come to a closing discussion, I think one of the last things I'd love to talk about is kind of like production tooling and production things that Ashwan, you would like to see on with kind of on the Flutter ecosystem, on the GraphQL ecosystem, on the Hasura side, what kind of things have been challenging to kind of debug or put in production, and what would you like to deal? What would you like less of? What would you when it comes to kind of dev and ops of both the mobile app and the GraphQL API and stuff like that?
Yeah. First, I'll talk about Flutter. So again, I come from Rails, right, where anything that becomes convention almost either becomes a part of the Rails core ecosystem, or it becomes such a highly recommended thing that you don't even have to think about it. When it comes to Flutter, I think a couple of things that we struggled with is stuff like push notifications, update strategies, deep links, right? These are core functionalities of most modern apps, right? You need to send push notifications. There's no way around it. And we found so many competing solutions that once we implemented them, and we realized that, hey, wait, the main the app got built, and then you click on a push notification and it's running in parallel. So it was just hard for us to reconcile that how do I navigate this person to another screen, right? Especially coming from a web background where every request has a lot of context, right? You know that this user is logged in, you know that I want to send them to a sign-in screen or dashboard. Whereas in mobile, you're saying that there are multiple threads running. The main thread is already opened the app, but there's a parallel thread that wants to go somewhere else, right? So I think either it's a part of the core Flutter ecosystem, or it's opinionated, saying that, hey, these are some of the recommendations we have. I think that would help a lot. Same with stuff like deep links. We struggled a lot with this for the same reasons, right? Where the app is open, you clicked on a deep link, and I'm like, wait, I want the main app to do something, but I don't have a reference to that. How do I make it go somewhere else, right?
Right.
I think that would be super helpful from a Flutter perspective. Now, regards to Hasura or GraphQL, right? One of the things we struggled with is authentication and authorization. Authentication to some extent is solved by JWT, but then tying that to an authorization system, saying, are you authorized to update this user object, right? Becomes complicated, especially in our app, because we have a multi-tenant app, right? Where a user, when they're looking at their own profile, has edit rights. When a user is looking at someone else's profile, they don't. But hey, that user could also be a business looking at their customer's profile, in which case they do again. Right. So creating this authentication or authorization layer in Hasura with like those and/or conditions, it's like 500 lines of code, and we don't know what's going on by the end.
Right. Very interesting. Yeah. No, that makes sense. And I think kind of on the I can touch a little bit upon kind of like production grade stuff that and some systems on auths that we're working on. But would love to hear from you, Chris, on what kind of work the Flutter team is doing for on kind of this production tooling in a sense, or these kinds of integrations and things that Ashwan was talking about.
Yeah, the main goal for the Flutter team is to make sure that the ecosystem is there and supported and robust to be able to support these kinds of things. For example, we as a team have looked at, for example, JSON serialization, but we have not done any kind of GraphQL specifically, right? We want to make sure that the ecosystem is healthy, and the folks that want to build GraphQL or any other kinds of both tooling and libraries have what they need from the ecosystem, as well as making sure the core services that you would build these kinds of things on are there and robust. And that's how we think about the Flutter team role, because again, there's just no way for us, we just can't scale to build all of the long tail of what you would need, and we don't try. Instead, we make sure we have a solid infrastructure.
Right. Makes sense. And in kind of like the evolution of Flutter and I guess maybe Dart as well. What are things that you're looking forward to in the next towards the rest of 2020? Maybe more. Can you make 2020 brighter for us?
Well, gosh, that's a big role. I'll throw
no pressure.
What I will say is that we're trying. One of the big features that's coming that I'm actually super excited about is this idea of null safety. Right now, the type system of Dart by default, if you have a variable, it's a string, it's an int, it's an object, it's a user, whatever it is, right? It can be nullable by default, right? So that value could have some numeric value or an instance of a user, or it could be null. And that leads to, that's the $1 billion mistake, right? That leads to all kinds of problem, null reference exceptions, et cetera, et cetera. So we are busy right now doing a big a change to the language to add null safety and null soundness, with the idea that, and a bunch of migration tools to move all the existing code forward and being able to mix and match, right? Code that hasn't been moved to code that has been moved. But this idea that, the syntax of the language actually changes, in that if you say string or int or whatever, it is no longer null. The compiler says, hey, you're trying to assign a null to the thing. It's not null. What are you doing? That's not okay. And all the implications of that, one of which is, being able to increase the performance, decrease the size, because all those runtime null checks can now go away, right? Now, there are places in this, when I say the syntax of the language changes, we add, the kinds of syntax like a question mark that says, oh, this is nullable. It can be null, in which case the compiler puts those checks in, but only for instances of that type. So it's much smaller impact on your code overall. And there's all this code you've got littered throughout your code base that says assert not null, assert not null, if null, you can just throw it away. You can just bake it into the type system, throw all that code away, and your code just becomes more robust. I'm super excited about that. We're at phase 1 right now, which is, it's available in preview at the Dart level. We've moved a bunch of the Dart libraries. We're moving towards phase 2, where the Flutter engine itself and a bunch of the Flutter plugins are moving to support null safety. And at that point, you'll be able to try it in your Flutter programs. And ideally, by the end of the year, we'll just say everyone should just be null safe right now. Move all your code. Here's some tools. Go and all Dart and Flutter code just gets better, which is fantastic.
And if I can say that the most used function in our entire program is called is not null, empty, or false. Right? We're just trying to, everywhere where we expect a value, we're like, hey, first put this wrapper around it just in case, for whatever reason it became null.
Exactly. That's how everyone kind of does. You're actually more disciplined than most programmers I've met, right, that actually have such a function that you apply on a regular basis. Most code is just littered with that assumption it won't be null, and Sometimes you get assert not null, and sometimes you don't. And yeah, so we're working to do a much better job.
Yeah. No, that sounds very exciting. I think that sounds like a big win. Hasura itself is written in Haskell, and one of the first back in the day when I started working with Haskell, one of the first things that made a tremendous impact on me was the maybe type, and was kind of not dealing with this null checking. And I was like, my goodness, why isn't this there? Like this is the first thing everybody should have in any language, right? And it's surprising that we've gotten so far, for so long without having this as a part of the type system, right? Of just making things explicitly nullable, not nullable, and having that at the type level, right? So I think that evolution is going to be very, very powerful. That makes a lot of sense. On the Hasura side of things, to Ashwan's point, where one of the things that we're also super excited about is supporting multiple roles, and so that should be for any particular user to be able to have multiple roles and use a combination of them simultaneously. I think that would be amazing for the kinds of use cases that you're talking about. So that's something that we're very excited about, that we should have in our next release or the release after. So that's definitely going to be a big thing. And yeah, I think from that point, it's going to make a lot of these kind of complex auth Z cases much easier to think about when you're setting up that GraphQL API. So that's kind of exciting on our end. I think because we're sort of out of time, I guess to kind of wrap up, would love for you folks to share your pandemic stress busting tips or any picks that you have, tech or non-tech, for folks who are listening in. Ashwan, would you like to go first?
I'd say for number one thing would be move to Flutter, move to Hasura to reduce your stress, make your work at home experience much better.
That's awesome.
Well, one of the pieces of advice that I find, I have a lot of people coming to me and say, hey, how do I learn any new technology? Recently it's Flutter, but over the years it's been, how do I learn X, Y, and Z, right? And I would say, for those people who kind of want to get up to speed on Flutter, I would say you definitely should look at the docs and run the samples and write sample code, hello world, and simple stuff. But I would recommend actually you carve out a side little project and build a thing you care about. Maybe it's a little game you'll actually play. Maybe it's a little app you'll actually use to help improve your life. Build something you actually care about, and that will make it 10 times easier to learn, because then you'll go, oh, I'm running this app. I need this feature. Let me go track down how to implement that feature in Flutter, or this feature, or, oh my God, I can't believe Flutter does that. Let me add that in, and that, so build something you care about with Flutter is a great way to get up to speed on Flutter. And of course, you'll need to keep your data somewhere. So what better place than GraphQL?
That makes and on that note, I think we've working with the community, I think we've put together a nice Flutter plus GraphQL plus Hasura tutorial. If you head to hasura.io/learn, you'll see a Flutter icon there, and so that's a nice tutorial on Flutter plus GraphQL plus Hasura, which should have you building like a real-time app in just about 2-3 hours. So that might be useful as well. Any pandemic tips from you, Chris, or any other tips in life for your picks today?
So what tip specifically? What kind of tip you could
I was just like whatever. Any kind of like sorry, I meant picks for just like picks for people who are listening in terms of tech and non-tech things, or even and then of course what I have been personally kind of asking everybody I meet is pandemic dealing tips.
I see. Sure. So I find there are two kinds of people in the world: people who like to work from home and people that don't like to work from home, right? And if you're in the kind of like to work from home category, good for you. That is fantastic. But even for those kinds of people, and I'm in that category, I like to work from home. You still need social interaction. I spend I've used Google Hangouts for video conferencing a lot in the last few months to do online activities with my friends, right? We do online gaming, we do, we work on projects together, and, we do online video conferencing to move projects, we do pair programming, as a product manager, I spend a lot of time in meetings, but I still, now, because I don't run into people in the hallway, right, I take time, even during those work meetings, 5-10 minutes to catch up on people, how they're doing in their lives, how they're dealing with the pandemic, what's news. Take those time, use the technology that we've got, not just for tech, but for the social, for the human, right? I mean, ultimately, the thing that I love most about Flutter is the people, both the people on the team and the people in the community, the people I get to help by making Flutter better. That's really what I like the most. So don't forget the people, is what I'll say.
Yep. No. Yeah. No, I think that's a very nice way to look at it and to do this, because I think what might even happen is that as we come out of this, we would be in a place where our communication with each other has actually improved, because we're becoming more intentional about communicating with each other, because we have to be now, right? So I think I think there's a opportunity for a good positive impact there. I mean, so that's interesting to hear. Thank you so much, folks, both of you, for joining us today. You can follow Chris at Chris Says on Twitter. We'll be posting these links. I'm at Tameko on Twitter as well. Ashwin, do you hang out on Twitter, or what's your
Twitter? I'm stealth.
Wise choice. Stay away. Wise choice. We'll post a few links on how folks can reach out to us if you have any questions. Thank you so much for tuning in, and thank you so much, Chris and Ashwin, for joining us today. See you next week for the next Fireside Chat. Bye, folks.
Bye.